Hello students, welcome back to my channel. Are you curious about how the demand curve changes when consumers switch to a lower priced alternative or when they start buying more expensive commodities? Well, the entire answer lies on the effects of other commodities on the demand of a particular commodity. Let us take a look at what are these different types of commodities. So the first type of commodity that we are taking into consideration are substitute goods. What are substitute goods? These are the goods which can be used in place of another commodity for satisfaction of a particular want. Here I have quoted an example of tea and coffee. Other such examples could be say paperback books and e-books, or you can say travel by train or an aircraft. Alright, now what happens here is the demand for a given commodity would vary directly with the price of a substitute commodity. In my case, since the example of tea and coffee is taken, we'll stick to the same example. So here tea is a substitute and the main commodity under consideration is coffee. So when the price of tea rises, demand for coffee also rises. The reason being tea is more expensive as compared to coffee. Let's quickly take a look at how this representation would look like on a graph. Now on this particular graph, we can see that on the y-axis and on the x-axis, we have price and quantity demanded placed just like we would do in a regular demand scenario. But since here we are talking about two different commodities, on the y-axis we are measuring price of tea, which is our substitute, and on the x-axis we are measuring coffee, which is our main commodity. Now when we plot the same scenario where the price of tea is rising, due to which the quantity demanded for coffee increases or rises, we get an upward sloping demand curve. Why are we getting an upward sloping demand curve? Because there's a positive relationship between the price of one commodity and the demand for another commodity or the quantity demanded of the other commodity. If this kind of a relationship exists between two commodities, these commodities are considered as substitutes. Let's take a look at another commodity or another category of the commodity. The another category of commodity is a complementary commodity or complementary goods. What are these? These are the goods which you use together or in combination to satisfy a specific want. Say for example, if you want to write, you need to have pen and ink together. Demand for a given commodity would vary inversely in this case with the price of a complementary good. In our case, in this example, the complementary commodity is ink and the main commodity is pen. So if the price of ink goes up, the demand for pen would fall down. Why? Because it would be relatively expensive for the consumer to use both the commodities together. Let's see how this would look on a graph. So this is the graph. Again, the same thing being depicted here. On the y-axis, I have price of one commodity, in this case the complementary good, which is ink, and on the x-axis we have quantity demanded in units of the main commodity, which is pen. Now as the relationship we studied in the previous slide, as the price of the complementary good rises, demand for the main commodity also falls, or demand for the main commodity would fall. We get a downward sloping demand curve. Now this kind of a relationship, an inverse relationship between two commodities, would exist if those two commodities are complementary commodities. It would be super expensive for a consumer to fulfill his desire for writing because it would fall heavily on his budget. Hence, if the price of a complementary good is rising, the demand for the main commodity would fall. Let's see how the cross price effect would work on the demand curve. So this is the cross price effect. First of all, let's see what a cross price effect is in the first place. So it would refer to the effect on the demand for a given commodity due to change in the price of a related commodity. The main consideration here is change in the prices. In case of substitute goods, when the price increases, you would see a rightward shift in the demand curve, indicating that the demand for the main commodity is increasing. When the price of a substitute good falls, you would see a leftward shift in the demand curve, indicating that the demand for the main commodity has decreased, and that's why the demand curve is shifting to the left. How these diagrams would look like, you can take a look at the video that I have placed on YouTube. It is called as change in demand. You can see in the I button somewhere on the screen. When it comes to complementary goods, an increase in the price of a complementary good would lead to a leftward shift in the demand curve, indicating the demand for the main commodity reducing. Why? Because it is becoming expensive for the consumer to buy both the commodities to satisfy a given want. In case of decrease or a reduction in the price of a complementary good, the demand for the main commodity would rise, causing the demand curve to shift to the right, and in this case you would see an increase in the demand because it is comparatively cheaper now for the consumer to consume both the commodities together to satisfy a given want. So this is the cross price effect on the demand curve in case of substitutes and complementary goods. Another category of commodity is normal goods. What are normal goods? These are the goods whose demand would increase with an increase in the income of the consumer. So the point of consideration here shifts from prices to the income of a consumer. For example, we have numerous commodities. You can look around in your room and you would find a lot of commodities that would vary with the changes in your income. Some examples that I have quoted are phones, cars, televisions, branded clothes, so on and so forth. Now what happens here is when the income of a consumer rises, he becomes better off in terms of his purchasing power, and hence the demand for normal goods would rise, and the opposite would also hold true. How does that look on a graph? This is how the graph looks like. On the y-axis, we have income as against the price in case of substitutes and complements. Here we have income plotted on the y-axis and quantity demanded of the main commodity on the x-axis. So as the income of the consumer rises, demand for these commodities also rises, giving us a positively sloped demand curve. What does this indicate? It indicates normal goods vary directly with the income of the consumer. The next category of commodity is inferior goods. What are these goods? These refers to those commodities whose demand would fall or decrease with an increase in the income of a consumer. Why? Because consumer would want fewer and fewer of inferior goods when he becomes better off. Examples of these type of commodities would be low cost clothing, public transport, so on and so forth. What happens here is as the income of consumer increases, demand for these goods would fall, and the opposite would also hold true. On the y-axis you see income, and on the x-axis you see quantity demanded for the main commodity. And since fewer goods would be demanded at higher income levels, you would see a downward sloping demand curve, indicating that inferior goods would vary inversely with income. So when there is a positive relation between the type of commodities and income, those goods are considered as normal goods. When the relationship is inverse or indirect, those goods are considered as inferior goods. So when we talk about effects on the demand curve, the main focal point here is changes in income. In case of normal goods, when income increases, you would see a rightward shift in the demand curve because consumers can consume more since they have more money at their disposal to spend. When the income of a consumer would fall, people would not be in a position to buy these commodities, and hence the demand curve for normal goods would shift to the left, indicating a decrease in demand. In case of inferior goods, when the income of consumer increases, since the consumer is becoming better off, his purchasing capabilities are becoming better off, he would buy fewer inferior goods and he would move on to more superior commodities, and hence the demand for inferior goods would decrease, causing the demand curve to shift to the left. Likewise, when the income of consumer decreases, there could be many instances why the income of consumer would decrease. Say for example, somebody gets demoted, somebody gets fired from the job, somebody is settling down for a lower paying job. So in all of these cases, the income is revising downwards and you would see a reduction in the monthly budget. So in those cases, demand for inferior goods would rise and you would see the demand curve shifting to the right, indicating an increase in the demand for inferior goods. So this is the overall effect on the demand curve when it comes to changes in income. I hope this video was pretty much helpful for y'all. I'll see you around in the next video. Take care. Bye now.